Hi, my name's Rob Hardy BSC. I'm the cinematographer of Devs, Mission Impossible Fallout, and Ex Machina. And you're listening to the Go Creative Show.
Hey everyone, my name is Ben Consoli. I'm a director and owner of BC Media Productions. This is the Go Creative Show, a podcast for filmmakers. Our guest today is Rob Hardy BSC. It's his return to the Go Creative Show because he came on the show a few years back talking about his work as director of photography for Ex Machina, which was such a great movie. If you guys haven't seen it, you must. But since then, he's done a lot. He was the director of photography for Annihilation, Mission Impossible Fallout, and the brand new Hulu series Devs, which we talk a lot about. Now, this episode is jam-packed. Rob is so good on the air. He's great with conversation, and he really can dive in deep to the behind-the-scenes secrets, particularly in Mission Impossible Fallout, where we talk quite a bit about how he achieved some of those absolutely stunning, amazing shots. Okay, so I'm here with Rob Hardy, BSC, the director of photography for Devs on Hulu, and so excited to have you back, Rob. It's been a while, but welcome back to Go Creative Show.
Thanks, Ben. Thank you. Yeah, it's been, what has it been like? My God, 5 years or something?
Years, yes. You were on for Ex Machina, and a lot has changed in the world, in your life. I mean, what is the state of Rob Hardy's life since Ex Machina? What did you move on to? Because my God, Mission Impossible, Annihilation, now Devs, and more. Talk to us a little bit about just kind of the impact of Ex Machina on your life and how things changed since then.
I think, with the reaction to Ex Machina after even, 5 years now, it still feels, in a sense, I guess what we were trying to do was make something that would stand the test of time. So not self-consciously or consciously, it's just sort of turned out that way. And I look back on it, and I'm extremely proud of that work. And it feels like it was the first, in terms of what Alex and I have been doing since. It was a great way to start for us, and since then we've just been trying to expand upon all of the ideas and the style in which we made that film, and also just develop as collaborators together, which has been really important for us as, from a working relationship. So we've made two movies, another movie and a mini series since then, and I think it feels like there's a real expansion of our ideas and our approach since Ex Machina. So a lot has changed in that respect,
How do you think you've honed your skills since? Because you've worked with Alex, the same director, on a couple of projects since, and it can only get better and has been getting better. But what are some of the ways that you've identified that you've honed your skills in cinematography through this experience with Alex and starting with Ex Machina?
That's a good question, but it's also a tricky question to answer, because I think as in any field, as you progress, you're learning constantly, right? So every experience is a new experience as far as I'm concerned. So you can take what you've learned from previous experiences, but also every project is different. So it requires a different approach, if you like. One of the key things that, specifically with the working relationship I have with Alex, is that, and this really started with Ex Machina anyway, is that we don't tend to reference other movies or even photographers, for that matter, when we're discussing a project and when we're prepping it in the very, very early stages. Partly because it's all really there on the pages. And by that I don't mean the way it looks is spelled out, because that isn't the case at all. It's just more a case of this idea that we like to allow the project to breathe and create its own voice. So with that in mind, when we start any production, we just talk about it's just a very simple approach in the sense that this might sound obvious, but it's literally like how can we translate this in the best way possible by doing the things that we do. And we have a sort of an unspoken shared aesthetic, I guess. So it makes that our job easier. So really what it's about is, and this is something in answer to your question, a long way around to answer your question, it's this idea of creating a world, right? So with Ex Machina, it was my first real experience. I mean, I'd been working up towards that moment anyway, but where we could physically create a 360-degree environment in which to tell our story. So we used that. We've sort of progressed with that idea, and it went through Annihilation into devs as well. So essentially, our prep and our discussions are always about the world which we're creating, not necessarily about how we're going to photograph it. It's just simply what is the physicality of this world, and then from my point of view, it's very much about creating a floor, a playground, if you like, in which Alex and the actors can move freely, and then I can shoot in any direction I want, if that makes sense. So with the case of devs, for example, especially when it came to the devs cube set, we had the same principles that we'd learnt on Ex Machina, but then times 10, and a lot of mistakes that we felt we'd made with Ex Machina. Just when I say mistakes, I don't mean narrative mistakes. I mean like just physical shooting things that we were okay. We understand because again, there's a similarity. There's lots of glass. It's a contained set. So we, our methods were slightly more honed when we came to shooting devs, but it was a similar sort of approach.
So you must be pretty deeply involved in the production design as well, if you're making these kinds of decisions.
That's correct. Yeah, I mean, not in terms of like I'm not there telling Marco and Mish how it should look. It's more a case of our conversations in prep start early, and Alex's great skill is to bring everybody, all of the HODs together in a room and start those conversations. So there's a great deal of transparency involved in the process and early on in and so there's also any decisions that I will make as far as the photography is concerned. I'll talk to Andrew Whitehurst, the VFX supervisor. I'll talk to Marco or Mish, the production designers, and we'll run these ideas by each other, and it's a constant dialogue so that no stone is unturned, and then nothing is happening that hasn't already been communicated, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So there's a great deal of trust involved, and it's a real team effort. So in that sense, yes, we all have our, we're all bringing to the table our own skills, but it's all coming together as one. So, for example, where the lighting and production design is concerned, I feel that they are very much interwoven. So, often I would say to Mark and Mitch that we want the set to feel like it could light itself in a way, but then we have control over that. So very much, a lot of the lights are integral to the set. And again, in the case of something like the Devs Cube set, which we were shooting on for 6 weeks, not a single light was brought onto the set in that period of time. It was the set and the exterior walls of the set and the way in which we'd placed the exterior lighting and were controlling that lighting created the environment that we wanted. And we could change that in a matter of seconds as well.
You had no lights within the cube set. Everything was from outside of it?
Correct.
Wow.
I had no physical film lights on set. So what I'm saying is after the prep, that we'd done, what we wanted to do was create a living, breathing thing, right? So we wanted to create a set that could effectively light itself. And in that, I mean, you don't just switch it on and off, or it's on or it's off. There are many different variations of that. So I would spend a good few weeks with my gaffer and the designers, and we would discuss how we would place lights into the set, and then also how many different variations we had within that context. So let me give you an example. The exterior gold wall of the dev sets, you have the cube set itself, and outside of that on the studio walls, these 4x4 gold leaf textured tiles, if you like, giant tiles. Our initial idea was to light the entire set reflected off of those tiles so that you would have a great deal of contrast, but there would be this sort of beautiful soft light. So again, it allowed us to look in any direction. We also wanted those tiles or that wall, the exterior wall, to feel like it was breathing in some way, or there was some sort of movement to it. And when I started working with Lee Walters, the gaffer, on how we would create those movies and what was the best move, we were looking for this one specific kind of movement across these tiles using all of our exterior tungsten lighting. And we discovered that there were just hundreds of variations that we liked. So we just created a library of different textures, different kinds of movements that would change and shift the lighting states within the cube itself without ever bringing the light onto the set. So when Alex arrived and we ran those through with him, we were just like, okay, well, look, we're here for 6 weeks, so we're going to use these, as many as we can, on a daily basis, depending on what any given scene is saying within the context of the narrative. If that makes sense.
Yeah, and that set does have this breathing kind of element. The lights are kind of pulsing throughout all the time. And I was thinking about it, I'm like, that's got to be an editing nightmare, because when you're going back and forth between people in close-ups, there must have been situations constantly where it's like, oh, wait, the light wouldn't be pulsing. It wouldn't be at its peak at this point. It would be lower. And just the challenge that must have been created by doing that. Did you guys have to think about that when you were doing your cross shots?
Yeah, when we first started, when we first fell in love with the idea, the concept, once we were already on set, we were like, we might end up screwing ourselves here a bit, because how are we going to do this? And it was exactly that. So what we did is we just simply progressed, right? We just went forward, started doing it. And Jake, the editor, was cutting, assembling stuff as it was coming in. And he quickly discovered that the biggest difference is, or the hardest thing to do would be cutting together levels, right? So if the levels were very different, then it would become very, very, very difficult. But we were never doing that, because we would create a look for any given scene. So that sense, or that kind of the atmosphere would always remain the same inside the scene itself. But then cross-shooting, that was just something that it sort of fell into place. I mean, the way we cover scenes in that context, and often Alex's scenes are like 8 or 9 pages long, is that we would do continuous takes. We would never really break the scene down unless it involved some physical movement from the actors that was almost impossible to cover in a single take. So we would always master as a single take, and then each close-up would be a continuous take. So effectively, what you did have was a pattern that would lock into itself. So the master always locked into those close-ups, because we were never only shooting it in part. We were always shooting it in its entirety for every single setup.
Did you sneak in lights into that cube set for close-ups at all, or did you stay true to this idea that everything was outside the walls?
Okay, Ben, I'm going to say it again. We didn't bring any lights.
I just don't believe you.
I can say this. Some lights arrived on the set when FX brought in their marketing team to shoot some stills and some video stuff for for their marketing campaign. And it was like an entirely different crew that came onto our set. And I said to the director / DP who was doing it, I was like, this is what we're doing. And he didn't believe me either, and brought some lights onto set. So, it's like, okay, that's fine. Do whatever you guys do, because we were going home for the weekend anyway. So we just left them to it. But that was the only time that lights came onto set.
Wow.
They weren't mine.
I love that. And I think what's really cool about it is that you're doing it, and first of all, it looks great, but you're also doing it in an effort to give the talent an opportunity to experience the space as they would if they were really living this moment out.
Exactly. And that initial idea started with Ex Machina. The seed of that idea started there. And prior to Ex Machina, I was doing, I've always worked on this principle that I like to light, I like to light environments as 360 degrees possible, even if it's just like a room, with windows. I'm going to light through those windows in the simplest terms, but if you place those lights carefully, you can allow yourself to be the freedom to shoot in the way that you would like to, and give the actors the freedom to move in the way that they would like to, and of course the director to work and block a scene as freely as possible. Often it'd be like, can they stand over here? Can they stand there? It's like, yeah, of course they can, and we'll position the camera in a way that complements that blocking. So, Devs was no exception. In a way, Devs was sort of, the progression, the real advanced progression of that.
We got a question from the audience about your projects with Alex Garland, from Mohit on Instagram. And this is probably going to be hard to even answer, but it says, what's your favorite Alex Garland project that you've worked on? Give it a shot. I'm sure they're all a little bit different. I'm sure you love them all equally, like your own kids. But is there something that I guess stands out, and maybe a reason why, if possible?
I would answer the question in this way: is that after Ex Machina, it was my favorite Alex Garland project. Then we shot Annihilation. It became my favorite Alex Garland project.
Nice.
Now with Devs, it's my favorite Alex Garland project. So that's kind of how it is, And I think really it's a body of work that, as I said earlier, it's a progression. So each one has its own particulars, So that's the best way I can answer that question.
Earlier, you mentioned that you and Alex both don't usually reference a lot of films when planning your projects. So I guess what are you using as visual references, or is it truly just being made up as you go?
Effectively, it's being made up as we go. Yeah.
Wow.
So as I said, it's really what we want to do is we work off the page, obviously, and those scripts are always incredible, which is a testament to his talent as a writer, but they're never over-explanatory. They're always very, very economical and simple. And that's our basis, as it should be, I think, in filmmaking. So we don't want to pollute that. We want it to be as pure as possible. And we literally do start from scratch, and it's always the big question, It's like, okay, so what does the Devs cube look like? What does the bear in how does the bear sequence in Annihilation? How does it look? And it's just like we approach it as filmmakers, and we want to be excited by what we're doing, right? So, and we want it to feel like it's the first time we've ever done anything like that. So therefore, it just sort of happens as we progress, and it happens through conversation. And also, like I say, it helps that we have a sort of shared aesthetic. So there's no need for me or Alex to show each other an image to say, I want it to look like that, because we sort of know how we want it to look. It's just a question of getting there. and again, I'll just come back to what I was saying. Like, really, it's about creating the world. And as soon as we've created the world, everything else falls into place. So if I walk onto the Devs Cube set, as I did in those first few days, it would just present so many beautiful options as far as visual storytelling is concerned.
Yeah.
So anywhere I looked, I would see something. And I would get very excited at first, and I would say to Alex, "I'm like, God, we've got to do this. We have to do this. Look over here. Look at this." And he'd be like, "I know, it's insane, but we need to, like, we can't just like do it all in the first week. Then where are we left? But actually, in the end, after 6 weeks, there were still new things presenting themselves constantly. Which was a delight. We never felt like we were repeating ourselves or searching for something that we didn't feel like we hadn't already done. So yeah, it works like that. I think also, any filmmaker will tell you this, is that subconsciously, in filmmaking, you obviously love movies, right? So, and visual referencing or not referencing, but you're attracted to imagery of any kind, whether it's sculpture, painting, or whatever it is. So subconsciously, there's always going to be your mind's going to take in those things. So I'm sure, like for example, in the case of Annihilation, subconsciously we knew, we'd both seen Tarkovsky's Stalker. We'd both seen that movie. We never talked about it, but subconsciously we sensed sometimes when we were out there on location, God, this does feel a bit like that. This story does feel a bit like that, but it wasn't like we want to do a shot like he did it. That seems sort of counterproductive to us.
The references are they're in here somewhere. And you're pulling from things without even making note of it. I think it's an interesting approach. And honestly, I don't think there's ever been anybody else that's come on the show that hasn't said specifically, like, we had a lookbook, or we were referencing these films, or this particular artist or something. And I like where you're coming from with that. That's really unique. Okay, so we talked about the way that you're lighting the cube set. Talk to me about the way that you're lighting everything else. Is there a constant lighting philosophy throughout Devs for the scenes outside of the cube?
Yeah, so it's really the same principle. So if you imagine, irrespective of whether we're on another set, so we built sets for Lily's apartment, we built sets for Jamie's apartment. I'm just trying to think what else we built sets for. We built sets within locations. So a lot of the exterior stuff of Amaya, the Amaya campus, if you like, was a combination of location elements that we shot in Santa Cruz, and then some other stuff that we shot in locations in London. But the principle was always the same. And when I say that, I mean in terms of, certainly in terms of lighting, is that I would, on location, Santa Cruz, for example, I don't know if you've ever been up to that.
I haven't, no.
Incredible, absolutely incredible. And it's like this beautiful combination of kind of brutalist concrete architecture and these sequoias. And they kind of align with each other. And there's this kind of friction also. So there's this constant play between nature and this kind of like the hardest kind of architecture you could imagine. But within that, there's a sort of harmony between the two. So again, it's a case of things that just present themselves, right? So that was a pleasure to work through. And again, the interiors in that location that we would shoot would be, as 360 degrees as possible. But then our restrictions came really with how much we could dress, how far we could go with it, and also it was a working campus at the time, so there were students there.
Wow!
Even though it was like August, September, so it was kind of quiet. Well, certainly throughout August. So we had the run of the place, but there were still students. So we had to work around that. But again, the principles always remain the same for me, which is this is our playground. This is our world, and we should treat it as such. And as far as lighting style is concerned, I need everything to connect, right? So you're talking about a 100-day shoot across 2 continents with different, like for example, California, late summer California, Northern California light. How's that going to match to dreary October London exteriors?
Yeah.
So we had to work around those things, and we had to really think about matching that stuff in. And I would use, as I always tend to do anyway, as my big sources would be big tungsten sources, both while I was in California and also shooting in London and then consequently Manchester. So those things helped align a lot of stuff, which is great because you can, I like the way this tungsten light mixes with natural daylight as it is. I was never trying to cut what was actually happening around us. I was just trying to augment it. And by doing it both in California and in London, it sort of seemed to work, and especially with mood shifts within the story itself.
The first scene where we are introduced to Nick Offerman's character, Forrest, they're all kind of sitting in, they're across a table from each other. There's a computer screen there. And it's within the first couple of minutes of the first episode. And right away, you're like, okay, we are embracing dark cinematography here because we're only lit from one side. Like, we are completely in shadow on the camera-facing side. And I mean, I love that stuff anyway, but it really sets the tone for where this is going to go. And I thought it was interesting because you see that scene before you see the cube scene, which is kind of lit all over the place and very unique and different and purposeful. And then you have that scene that's very like, the sun is somewhere out there. We're not going to worry about it. That's our only light source. I thought combining the two, and maybe I'm looking a little bit too deeply into it, which happens sometimes, but I felt like combining the two was combining reality and science fiction. And I think you guys do it beautifully all throughout the series. You did it in Ex Machina, but there's something about the way that you treat the lighting where you're mixing natural and this science fiction-y, purposeful, I'm actually surprised you said it was tungsten, but you're always making those combinations, like the brutalism architecture in the woods. Another one of those combinations. I felt like that theme was really following through the entire storyline as well as the lighting. And curious if A, I'm looking way too much into it, or if I'm actually onto something, and B, what was the intention there?
You are onto. You're very astute for picking that up. Then. It's like absolutely. 100%.
You hear that, people? I'm very astute. Thank you.
No, 100%. It's and that's what I was saying. It's like it's so important, especially when you're looking at, think about it in terms of it's such an expansive story, and suddenly, effectively we're shooting like a 6.5 hour movie, right? It's not, everything has to connect, and we're doing it across 100 days, and it's my job to find those visual threads and those visual connections from scene to scene to scene, and irrespective of whether we're exterior on a San Francisco street or whether we're, like you say, we're in a sort of high tech company office and it's like the sun is over there, and but it also has to serve the story as well. So in the case of that scene that you're talking about, I think it's where they were looking at the kind of worm. Yeah. And Forrest is eating the salad out of it. Yes,
so, which was a very odd choice, but I loved it.
It was a good choice. That in itself, the way I looked at it was like, look, they're in a room, they're making a presentation. in addition to the connection that I'm trying to make narratively and visually across the, in the global perspective, if you like, the specifics of that scene require a screen, something that's happening on a screen to be the center of that, the heart of that scene. Actually, the heart of the scene really is about, Sergei's realization that he's going to go into devs, but we show that he's an incredibly intelligent, skilled, technician and artist, and it's been honored, if you like, by the head of the company, and so the emphasis of that moment is on that screen and what's happening on that screen, and the looks between, the members of that, the people in that room. And so what was for me seemed to be fairly obvious was like, I have to create, I have to sculpt it in a way that it becomes about the screen, but we never lose that relationship between across the table, right? And there's an odd kind of atmosphere to the room because there's an odd atmosphere to that scene. So all of those things combined ended up creating what we created. I didn't really when we scouted it, but I didn't sort of sit and kind of storyboard and shot list it and do a kind of lighting with plan or anything. It was more like, okay, I know this is how it needs to look in a narrative context, because of everything else that's gone before and everything else that will come after. And I'm just going to cross my fingers and hope it works.
Let's talk about your camera choice for devs. What were you shooting on?
I was using a Sony Venice. Yeah. So
how did you come to that decision? And did you test anything else?
Yeah, I mean, always test. Every time I start a new project, I'll test. I'm not, I don't have a particular allegiance to any particular camera, although it might look like it if you sort of look at retrospectively of what I've done. But I just think it's important to start with a clean slate, on every production. So we would test everything. The American camera, the German camera, and the Japanese camera, so we would, and anything else that came into it as well. I even shot a little bit of film too, but that was just for my own kind of, indulgence. And again, it's a very democratic process. So we test it, and then I'm always looking at the big thing I want to know is that lens. The light lens sensor combination, right? So in the case of working with Alex, we tend to shoot digitally. We've always done it, so that's just the way it is. So I'm looking for that perfect combination. And I mean, in the case of devs, I'd used on Ex Machina, I used the Sony F65, and I really liked the look of that sensor. There's something kind of, and the combination between that and the Crystal Express lenses that I ended up using for that show. On Annihilation, we moved from using Sony F65s into using Reds and a little bit of DXL as well, the Panasonic cameras, because the narrative sort of dictated that. And also we did lots of lens shifts as well. So I changed my camera package as the movie progressed. We shot it as linear as we possibly could anyway. And that seemed to work really well for that film. And then in the case of devs, Sony had released this new Venice camera, which I'd been looking at. They brought it down to the set of Mission Impossible, even though we were shooting Mission Impossible on film. I'd asked Sony to bring it down because I was keen to just have a look at it. We had it out on the camera truck, and it was in its very early stages at that point. And I was just always in the back of my mind, I was thinking, this could be good for devs. Obviously, I was going to test everything else. But what was nice about that camera is that it served two purposes. And one in the sense that it supplied the right sensor look that I historically enjoy. It responds to the glass. That's quite a sharp sensor, but then it means that it reads the glass in a way that I really like, meaning that it sees every single aberration. And to me, my lens choice is, it's like you're choosing your paints or whatever. It's one of the most important choices you're going to make, as you know. And of course, I'll get down to my 4 final options and show it to Alex, and then we would just simply go, we like that, or that's the movie. Suddenly the movie presents itself in the test room. It's essentially what you're aiming for.
So you like the super crisp sensor and its ability to pick up everything on the lenses, and I think that makes sense. Yeah. What were the qualities of the lenses you were looking for, and what did you ultimately choose?
Well, we ended up going with the C series anamorphics, which have a very smoky, layered, dense quality to them, a very classic, kind of elegant look. And that sensor reads that beautifully, right? So there's nothing in between the glass and the way it's read. And then the combination of those lenses and the light, the kind of soft tungsten light that I'm using, and the way those lenses react to it, creates a perfect combination for me. What we also did was we expanded the C-series lenses so that they would wrap around the sensor, and we would push our aberrations out to the very, very peripheries of the frame, which then kind of emphasized the drop-off that much more. But also, on those lenses, sometimes you can have that aberration that runs across the bottom of the screen around the top, and it can look it can look a little like a mistake sometimes, a focus issue, right? And we didn't want any of that. But what we wanted was the best out of the lenses in that context. And the other reason we expanded them is because we were shooting on a 2:1 ratio. As opposed to a 16:9 or a 2:35. We found that sort of sweet spot, what we felt was the sweet spot. The other thing the camera I was going to say was was interesting to me is that it has this kind of Rialto. So you can lift off the sensor essentially, and it's an umbilical to the camera body. So what you have is a much more kind of condensed, smaller footprint. And I was using that for very long takes inside the Devs Cube in combination with a stabilizer, which is a very tiny little flight head. So then I could be outside of the room on comms to my dolly grip, Sam, and move through an 8 or 9 minute take, largely improvising the first master without any problems with reflections, or we essentially were just keeping the footprint down. And then I would be on the wheels. I would have that, and I would have B camera, so I could look at the 2 and B camera on comm. So it's like you're sort of controlling the whole thing as it's happening, but very quietly, obviously, and whispering. And so the camera presented that option to me, which I felt was really good too.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that Rialto mode. I mean, I've never used it. We've had a couple of people that have worked with the Venices talk about it in the past, but it sounds great for applications like that when it just needs to be smaller. You need to be able to be in a tight space.
Yeah, and also, moving forward, especially with the climate we're in now, moving forward to try and start making movies again, we've got to look at things like that, those kinds of solutions as well, where we need to protect actors and without losing that relationship, between the camera and the actor. And I think it was a neat way of doing stuff. We used it quite a lot actually in the end. That system, that combination.
But just to take a little bit of a deviation on the conversation, because I did want to talk about where you think filmmaking is going, during COVID and beyond. And we will certainly get back to the lenses. There's a couple of questions here from listeners, but I just want to take a quick second here since we're talking about it. What are you hearing? What are you seeing? Like, where do you think filmmaking and production is going when we do come back?
Well, I think filmmakers and filmmaking, it's all problem solving, isn't it, ultimately? And looking for solutions, the perfect solution that's that works for, you know, the economics of it and the creative elements of it, and, you know, telling the story. So I think we're in a good place because we will figure it out essentially, and we'll find a way forward. You know, and there've been a lot of ideas flow to the DGA white paper and things like that. Is that, you know, how do we do this safely, ultimately, without compromising our story, or rather, you know, adding to it even. So in some senses, it's like I'm kind of, at the moment, I was in prep. We were 2 weeks out from shooting a movie here in Atlanta, because I'm in Atlanta right now. And now that movie, the way we're going to shoot that movie, because it's going to come back and we're going to start prep again soon, is a completely different beast to what it was originally. But now it's you know, the challenges that presents to me is exciting, because it's like, okay, well, how can we use this to our advantage? How can we, you know, as storytellers, how can we combine the idea of doing it in the way that we have to do it?
Can you explain to us at all how you're doing it and what the reasons were?
Well, I mean, if you look at the DGA paper, what they talk about is zoning, right? So you effectively have to zone the whole production, which means that you know, your zone A, if you like, is shooting crew, and then within that you have to be able to walk onto the set, practically not be able to leave that set unless you have to go into another set, and the whole thing is like created in a way that it's like you never meet those from zone B, which is production.
Okay.
And then zone C is effectively the outside world.
I understand. I thought you were talking about the way, like a camera choice or a you know, some lighting decisions, or things that had
100%. That also then applies to that. So,
yeah,
you know, if I'm in a room and normally if we're shooting a scene and then, you know, you turn around and shit has to move and some tweaks have to happen, whether it's the camera, a lens needs to come in, or, you know, grips need to come in, lights need to come in. Those things have to be looked at differently, very, very differently.
Yeah. And
you have to plan a lot more in advance. And strangely enough, from what we were talking about earlier, you know, my method of lighting spaces as 360 degrees as possible is an advantage.
This is your time. You're like, I have a solution. We're not going to light anything. How about that? It's done.
Effectively.
I like the way you think. You're tailor-made for this. In our last few minutes, I want to get to just some questions that we've had across our social media. We've got a question here from Liam Kerrigan on YouTube. He wants to know, where does your love for anamorphic come from?
You know what? I can answer that question quite specifically, strangely. And this does involve a film reference. And when I was a kid, growing up, when I started to first watch movies, I came across John Carpenter and a bunch of movies that he made in that period. There was about 4 or 5 movies, from Halloween, I would say, over to probably Escape from New York, maybe that far, which included The Thing, one of the greatest movies of all time. And I will argue with anyone about that. But one thing I really noticed when I was watching those movies as a kid was how they looked, and I was I became very aware of whenever one of those films came on TV, or if I had a VHS, and it had a different look to other films, and I didn't know why. Right, I had no idea. I just knew that I was watching a John Carpenter movie, and then of course I was like, okay, so I need to find out more about how they did this. And I found out about the cinematographer, Dean Cundy, and those two combined made a series of movies that had a very particular look to them. And it was something to do with the way in which they photographed the space. It was a smokiness to it always. It was a very particular thing that I kind of fell in love with. And I think it wasn't a case of me at the time saying, wow, they're using anamorphic lenses. I didn't know what the hell an anamorphic lens was, but I think subconsciously it planted a seed. And so, then progressively as I've grown up or developed as a filmmaker, that never went away. And then, of course, the other obvious one would be the Sergio Leone westerns. But what I'm really talking about there is a ratio as opposed to an actual lens, right? So, of course, you can use spherical lenses and shoot in a 2:3:5 ratio, and it's a different thing. But the anamorphic, and I'm talking about the glass itself, not the ratio, the glass, has that kind of feeling that I had when I first, first had that epiphany, I guess, watching those B horror movies from the 70s. It just was one of those things. And then, of course, it progressed from there. It went everywhere.
And I love that you're bringing up the fact that there's two elements to anamorphic. It's the ratio, but also the glass itself. And I like that because I think that kind of gets lost sometimes when people just talk about anamorphic.
Completely. Absolutely, 100%. When I talk about anamorphic, I'm talking about the glass. I'm talking about anamorphic lenses. I'm not talking about a 2:3:5. And I agree with you. Often people don't differentiate between the two, but there is a huge difference. So yeah.
We got a question here from Liam. Oh, another Liam Carrigan. Apparently he wants to co-host, I guess is what it is. But I do like this question a lot because he's talking about your use of camera movement. He says, I love how minimal most of the camera movement is. What made you guys decide on using so many long, lingering, static shots?
That also, that's to do with a number of things, and ultimately it's the filmmaking itself, right? So again, it's part of the bigger picture. So Alex's cutting style is very, he doesn't go for a very heavily cutty style, right? So it's always about observing and doing it in an unflinching way. But not pushing it to a sort of self-consciousness, as this can sometimes happen with other movies. And so there's in the case, it's a couple of things. So in that sense, you're allowed to look, because of the cutting style, you're really allowed to linger on those shots. You're really allowed to understand the space and the characters and everything that's happening. So that's one thing. The other thing is that, obviously, that, like I said before, a lot of those dialogue scenes are very long. They're 8-9 pages long. So we just master it. And if we're moving the camera really quickly, it's just a simple, silly thing. You move the camera really quickly, you're moving around the room too quickly, and you're not really getting to the heart of the scene. You're not listening to what that person is saying and absorbing. Yeah, I just think because we like it. It looks good.
There you go. We like it. It's the truth. Okay, we got a couple questions about Annihilation.
Oh, yeah.
Story Lit Films on Instagram is asking, a lot of scenes were outdoors. What did you do for lighting?
I, again, use big, broad sources that would be combined with whatever was happening naturally. A lot of it was tungsten. And you've got to remember with that movie, the whole thing is set. Ultimately, the story is kind of set in the South somewhere, the deep South, like, even Florida, perhaps. I know that's where the book was set, Florida. We were shooting this in UK. The whole thing was shot there, in Windsor. So, but in addition to that, I had the added element of what the shimmer would do to the daylight, how it would affect the daylight, which again gave us a kind of great carte blanche, if you like, a kind of a green card to play a little bit. So as they were walking through forests and things like that, I would end up planting, 24K tungstens way off into the trees, straight back at camera, to create this sense of a low sun, and then allow it to do and combine that with sort of color projectors and allow all of that stuff to bleed into the natural daylight. So there was always something that would anchor it into our story by using that tungsten light within that narrative context.
And one more question too about Annihilation and also Ex Machina a little bit too. MFka on Twitter, it would be awesome to know how he handles the visual effects shots in Annihilation and Ex Machina compared to the very practical effects in Fallout. And we're going to end our conversation with a little bit about Mission Impossible Fallout. We've got a couple questions from our audience there too. So thank you, MFka. So visual effects shots, how are you handling them in, Annihilation, Ex Machina, Devs versus the practical shots in Fallout?
Well, that starts with a relationship with a great relationship with Andrew Whitehurst, the VFX coordinator for all of the Garland films. So he was very much, and again, it's something that started with Ex Machina, it's very much embedded into reality and what's happening in front of the camera and what's in the room.
Yeah.
So he would never shy away from the idea that we would simply shoot as much in camera as we possibly could, and then what he was doing, which I think is testament to how brilliant the VFX artist he is that he can make it work within that context. So there was never very much green screen or blue screen, if any. There certainly wasn't any on Ex Machina. There was a tiny bit on Annihilation, and I don't really remember anything on Devs either. So it wasn't really our world. It comes back to a concept, and that concept is how do you embed how do you make it feel as real as possible? So I'm sure everyone talks about, but we're not VFXing entire worlds. We're VFXing tiny elements within that world. And when they combine, I would always say to Andrew, jokingly, that some of his best work was like when he puts in things like police tape, like blowing in the wind. I'm like, did you do that? That's amazing. And it's like, and suddenly it's like, it's adding to everything else that we're doing. And that's brilliant, brilliant work.
I love finding out that there were visual effects and scenes that I didn't know. Yeah. Like, I love that. Yeah.
So we always work on that principle. And of course, technically you deal with it on a base, on a day-by-day basis, I guess.
Yeah.
And again, Andrew's brilliant at just embracing lens choices. He loves it. He came out of film school, so he knows, he understands, he gets it. He's a filmmaker himself, photographer himself. So again, that really helps with the storytelling. And that relationship is key. It's like you have to have that strong relationship.
And we're going to round out our conversation with your work on Mission Impossible Fallout. We've got two questions here. The first, from Guru Raj on Instagram, wants to know about planning and shooting the stunt work in Fallout. I mean, that must have been just amazing. A totally different type and style of filmmaking is when you're doing stunt work. We had a stunt woman on a couple of years ago just talking about her work, and it's like the things you need to think about from a cinematography standpoint is like, if you don't do it, you truly don't know that you ever would have to think about these things. So I'm curious too. And thank you, Guru Raj, for that question. Talk to us about the way you worked with stunts on Fallout.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because with Fallout, we were doing something that isn't often done and very rarely done in terms of the combination of stunts and, if you like, the rest of it, the whole story itself. The first thing we did is that we eliminated the second unit. So we did everything.
Wow.
Yeah. And so essentially what you had was the main unit shooting special effects, VFX, stunts, all of it. Why get rid of second unit? That came from Chris McQuarrie and Tom. And a lot of it's to do with the way Tom works. And Tom's approach is essentially he will do everything, right down to close up of the hand picking up the mug or whatever it is.
Wow.
It's Tom, right? And so one of the emphasis is on the stunt work was the fact that he's doing it, right? So he's doing everything. So we really needed to, from a photographic point of view, we really needed to embed ourselves. And my first thing I said to Tom actually was that I wanted to be, I wanted to put the audience right there with him. And because I think what they were used to in the past, and what traditionally when you shoot stunts, is like you'll long lens a lot of stuff, especially car stuff. Or you might be handheld with fight stuff. But what I wanted to do was to find an elegant way to put us right next to Tom without ever losing a sense of the environment. So it was a combination of those two things, because we were in these amazing environments. Those movies go all over the world. You want to feel Paris around Tom as he's speeding through it on a motorcycle. You want to feel the landscape as he's flying the helicopter. So my whole concept was to get the camera as close as possible. And, you know, that then what that does is it reveals, it looks at something in an unflinching way. And that's a challenge to stunts, because a lot of work with stunts does involve hiding stuff and putting it in, but also doing it safely, right? Doing it absolutely 100% safely and creating something that feels authentic, but of course the whole thing's, it's not real. So we were kind of combining those two worlds, and we were lucky enough to have a lead who would do it all. So it became a very practical approach that we took. And I could get cameras as close as I possibly could, and it was great. And again, like I say, without ever losing that sense of the environment. So I think in one sense, obviously it's territory I'd never walked into before, but I think it was territory that all of us had never walked into before. I wasn't interested in, and neither was Chris or Tom, in going into this just shooting another movie with stunts in it, in the way that stunts are shot. We wanted to do it immersively, and to do that, it helps you have an actor who is in that world, because it's very difficult not to do that, or to do that if you don't have an actor that doesn't do stunts to the extent that Tom does. So then, yes, you have to take more of a traditional approach to shooting stunts. But I think Fallout was an exception to that rule, you know, and it made it a pleasure.
Do you think that it was an exception because you hadn't done, you know, you didn't have a big portfolio of stunt films prior to that, so you were kind of just making it up as you go, making it your style? Or are there specific pitfalls that you sort of knew about that you said, I'm definitely not going to, or not even pitfalls, but techniques that you were thinking, I'm definitely not going to do that?
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, I think in a weird way, some would argue not, but in a weird way, me walking into it, you know, from the approach to filmmaking that I had, you know, there's a reason that Chris picked me to shoot the movie, and Chris and Tom picked me to shoot the movie. And so that I was going to honor that. I wasn't going to back away from that. And so I stuck to my guns.
Yeah.
And, you know, there were times when I would be pushing and sometimes be told, well, that's not possible. But then we were shooting Mission Impossible. So anything, it seemed to me anything was possible, and it did, and it, you know, it worked. So there were a lot of challenges doing that, and I think everybody felt challenged, but in a really good way, in a positive way, you know. So I was, you know, I wanted to embrace that challenge, and like I said, you know, the one thing that I felt was like, all I knew is that Tom and Chris wanted to do something completely different to everything that had gone before, and I was going to honor that. And I was, like I said to you, I was there to help with that. And it meant that it was, it's a marathon. You're running a marathon. You're not sprinting, and it means challenging all departments. And when people get challenged, they either rise to the challenge or they don't. And for the most part, we all rose to that challenge, and it became what it became.
I know it was a while ago, obviously, but is there a particular scene or sequence that just simply would not have happened if you were just more well-versed in stunt filmmaking? Like, just something that came, was there something that came that you're like, the reason that came out the way it did is because I didn't know how to do it any other way. I just think the choice of bringing somebody on that has no stunt experience for a film like Mission Impossible is a real testament to your cinematography and to their trust in you. So I'd love to know, like, can you point to something where that was a true, real result of the fact that you just simply hadn't done it before?
Oh, that's a tricky one, because you know what? I think there are a lot of sequences in that movie that you could apply that concept, that theory to. I think one of the things, the classic scene, I think one of the many classic scenes the movie carries is that bathroom fight sequence. But that sequence, that really works because those three guys were doing it for real, right? Even Henry, and by the way, a lot said about Tom doing his own stuff. Henry, my God, I mean, he was hanging out of helicopters at 9,000 feet in South Island Museum, freezing his ass off, and nobody clapped him on the back. But, that's Henry Cavill, so he's a good sport, and he just did it. And he got involved in those fights as well. So we had a lot of fun with that bathroom scene. And it was one of those things we kept going back to. That set remained standing. We were supposed to, I think we had like 5 days to shoot it, and we shot for 2.5 weeks. And that was over a period of a month, because we just kept going back in. We were just like, we should try this. And I think with my approach was very much like, again, the no lights on set approach, the creating a 360-degree environment approach. And that I worked closely with Peter on that set and sort of pushed a bit to get a set that could light itself in a way that was, and again, unflinching. So you see everything. Because originally it was supposed to be kind of pools of light and all that kind of stuff. I was like, no. Let's make this contrast with where they've just been, which was a crazy kind of massive warehouse rave, where it's, you've got strobing lights, you've got lasers everywhere, it's quite dark, into this kind of almost 2001-esque environment that where they're supposed to be doing something, with subterfuge, if you like, but there's nowhere to hide there, because the thing's white and it's lit, blanket lit from above. And so you have this beautiful environment in which this kind of chaotic fight unfolds, and there's nowhere to hide, and everything is in plain sight. And I loved that. And that was something I kind of pushed quite hard for. So I think, and there were other examples, but I think maybe that's an example.
And I love it too. I mean, it's such an iconic scene, and there's so much chaos in this otherwise very plain and simple room. And it's almost like a stage play where it's just the camera really gets out of the way. Everything gets out of the way. And you're just like, here's your rink, here's your ring, fight, go. Like it really does provide like the perfect canvas for a scene like that. I thought it was a great choice.
I think the other thing, just to finish off on that, is and again, it comes back to this concept of proximity and wanting to get close to Tom doing stuff, right? And this is where it's very different to doing a regular kind of stunt-driven movie, and where my sort of inexperience came the sort of fearlessness and the maybe foolishness, probably, it sort of came into its own, where I'm just like, no, let's, I'm in the, because I'm I operate a camera as well, so I kind of wanted to be part of the mess, if you like, and the excitement of it all. So I'm in a pursuit vehicle on the streets of Paris, and I'm pushing the driver to get, and he's amazing, Mike Jeskin, brilliant, like top world-class driver, to get that camera as close to Tom as possible, safely, of course, I might add, safely. But it enabled us to really, do things that you wouldn't normally do, because he's on that bike, right? And there's no tow rig, there's no nothing. He's on that bike. And so we can get the camera right up to him. And you can just feel the kind of shiver go down your spine when you're doing it, because you're like, oh my God, this is happening for real. There's no green screen. There's no one with a fan in his hair. It's none of that stuff. It's like we've closed this entire street down and we're speeding along it, and he's avoiding cars and he's driving this bike, and here we are shooting it for real. Wow. That stuff is stuff you don't forget. And everybody's just kind of like this the whole time. It's like the assurance on that dude must be.
I can't even imagine. I can't even imagine. Insurance is on my mind right now because everything's being redone because of COVID. And just hearing you say this, I'm like, I can't believe this happened. How did this movie get made? It's crazy.
No.
And one last question I don't want to forget about. Jeff Fagan wants to know, how did you monitor the skydiving shot? That's a very specific question. Talk to us about that. I mean, I'm curious just about the whole way you produced the skydiving shots, but the monitoring, I think, is certainly important to know how you did it.
Well, I mean, in many respects, when it actually came to the jump itself, you got to remember that that was the end result of a period of 3 or 4 months of fine-tuning the whole idea and the concept. So in other words, when it finally came to shooting it, we had, like, I think it was 14 attempts at the actual jump from the plane itself, and you've got it's choreography that you trust at that point. Is the best way I can describe. And the only reason it's got to that point is the amount of preparation that we did to get to that point. And that's right down to the actual choreography. It's down to how do we get a camera to half shoot a scene inside a plane and then exit the plane and then continue to shoot the scene at whatever it was, 13,000 feet, in a way that doesn't feel like it's a skydiving movie, in a way that it feels like exactly the principle that I've been talking about all along, is that sense of getting the audience involved in the action. So, for example, when focus dips slightly, it's a genuine focus dip. It's a mistake, but that mistake adds to the authenticity, if you like. For example, if it had been, Marvel, it would have been almost too perfect. And then your believability goes out the window. And so with this, Tom was very, very upfront about his intention from the very beginning. He's like, I don't want a skydiving movie. I want this to feel desperate and real and crazy and immersive, and that's what we had to do. So, and I could talk for a long time about how we got to that point technically and creatively, but I'm pretty sure we won't have the time to do that.
We won't have a long time, but if you want to spend a couple minutes, it would be kind of cool. I mean, it is.
Well, I mean, look, we broke it into stages, right? So the first thing we did is we marked out on the stage the dimensions of the C-17 itself, right? So what you're looking at creatively is the back end of a scene and a single shot that has to exit the plane. And that's something that nobody had really done that didn't feel like a skydiving shot.
Yeah.
We had to do it with technology that I was comfortable with, that would serve the quality of what we'd shot already. So that involved bigger cameras, anamorphic lenses. Secondly, or in this case, spherical lenses. In this case, it was we were going IMAX on it. And then we did a lot of work on wind tunnels. And of course, it being Mission Impossible, we had to have the biggest wind tunnel in the world on the back lot of at Leavesden, which had 4 jet engines pumped into it, which was insane. But a lot of the work was done there to choreograph the sequence. At first, we thought we were going to shoot the sequence there. And I had to then, one of my challenges was, because there's originally a script that the skydiving jump was at night. And I just said, look, guys, you literally are not going to see anything. At 13,000 feet, you're going to see the lights around his helmets, and it's not going to work. What you want to do is you want to feel the curvature of the earth. You want to feel that height that you get, when you're in a jet plane and you look out the window and the sun is long gone, but you still feel this kind of weird twilight. So I said, why don't we say the jump happens at that point? So by the time they reach Paris and they've gone through the storm clouds, it is night. So we can sell that idea in reality, which is what we did in the end.
Yeah.
So you get a lot more out of it, right? And when we were working with the wind tunnels and the original idea that we were going to shoot the whole sequence on a wind tunnel, with the exception of the first part, I had to find a way of having a change of lighting changes that would take you from kind of weird 13,000 feet twilight into storm cloud, into lights coming up from Paris below. And I can tell you that was difficult, but, we figured it out in the end. And by the time we got to the point of figuring that out, both Henry and Tom, specifically Tom, felt the wind tunnel just wasn't working for them. They wanted to do it for real. And at which point then, I've already looked at these ideas like, do we need a cameraman who can train up as a skydiver? Because I'm not jumping out of a plane, I can tell you that. Do we need a skydiver that we train as a cameraman? And which is eventually where we ended up. And this first part, it needs to feel like a steady cam, and we're not obviously jumping out with a steady cam. That's ridiculous. And is it going to be a helmet cam? If so, he needs to be crouched at a certain height. Are we going to put him on wheels somehow? All of these questions had to be researched and developed and then answered and then given a safety stamp to be able to do it 13, 14, 15,000 feet. So yeah, it was a process.
So where did it end up? You had an actual diver that you trained as a camera operator. Correct.
And he ended up, we had a red camera broken down onto on a helmet cam. We had our Primo 70 IMAX lenses, and we had a focus pulling handoff, if you like, mid-air handoff from plane to ground. And
what do you mean mid-air focus pulling handoff? So were you controlling it remotely in some way?
Focus was controlled remotely.
Okay.
Yeah. So but from the plane itself, and then there was a handoff somewhere in mid-air to the ground.
Just by changing the signal, I guess, from
Correct.
Which unit is attached to it. Wow. My God.
I know.
That is just, that's crazy.
The whole thing was nuts. The whole thing was insane. But
how many times did you do it?
It looks great. 14 times.
Oh, wow.
Actually, over a period, it was a period of 3 weeks, 14 jumps, I believe. And it was probably the last couple of jumps when it really worked.
Unbelievable. There must have been a point when you're 12 jumps in, 10 jumps in, and you're like, this just isn't working. Are we going to keep going until it does? Or
that's exactly, that was our approach throughout the whole movie. And sometimes you're like, there's no way this is going to work. But that's where, the skill of someone like Tom comes in. He's just constantly like, no, we keep going. We keep going. And he's like, I don't care. I'm going to stay, because the first part of the jump was out in Abu Dhabi. And he's like, we're staying here until we've got it. We're not leaving until we've got it. And everyone's like, maybe we're going to be here for 4 or 5 weeks or a month or 3 months. Who knows? But that was always the case with every scene we approached. It was like, particularly when it came to the stunts, that we would never walk away from it until we all felt like we really got it.
Wow. Well, Rob Hardy BSC, your work is just stunning. And I'm so glad that you keep coming back on Go Creative Show to share your experiences, because I'm just such a huge fan of your work. And Devs is fantastic. It's on Hulu right now. You guys should certainly be checking it out if you haven't already. And of course, all your other great work there as well. And we'll put links to all of this stuff in the show notes. But Rob, thank you so much for coming back on Go Creative Show.
Thanks for asking me, Ben. It's been a pleasure. Real pleasure.
All right, I want to thank Rob Hardy BSC for coming back on the show and sharing his experiences on, wow, I mean, talk about a diverse range of films. Ex Machina, Mission Impossible, the series Devs. I mean, his work is so good. And I was so glad that he came on the show to talk about it. I'm also glad that we've got two fantastic people behind the scenes making this show happen. One of them is our producer, Connor Crosby. You can find him at ignitionvisuals.com. And of course, Matt Russell, who's been there since the beginning with me, mixing this audio right now. He mixes and masters and makes the show sound so good. I don't know how he does it sometimes, but we thank him for doing it. You can find him at Go Creative Show. What am I saying? You can find him at gainstructure.com. Gainstructure.com. And of course, on Twitter at GainStructure. So follow us all over the place at Go Creative Show, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and of course, subscribe on your favorite podcast app and keep your ears and eyes open. Follow me on Instagram, Ben Consoli, because I will be revealing the system that we have created that you can all use yourself. It's nothing special. I'm not selling anything. It's just all the stuff that you can have access to right now to do true remote DSLR filmmaking. It's going to blow your mind. And of course, OpenReel. 10% off of OpenReel by going to openreel.com, scheduling a demo and letting them know you heard it from me. And of course, our sponsors, MZ Education for Creatives and PostLab, stress-free collaboration in Final Cut Pro and Premiere. Without those people, the show wouldn't exist. So please support those that support us. And we will see you next week on another episode of Go Creative Show, a podcast for filmmakers.